Wondering what the F has happened to your body and your life? You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to Season 3 of Transforming 45, where we dive into the incredible stories of how brilliant humans are navigating the midlife squeeze with courage, passion, and a healthy dose of humor. Don't miss out on any of our heart-led episodes. Hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and if you're inspired, share an episode you love with a friend. It means more to me than I can express that you're choosing to spend time here and sharing our message of midlife revolution. So let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am thrilled to welcome Amanda Hinman. She is a functional medicine health coach, a best-selling author, and she specializes in helping women between the ages of 40 and 60 who are struggling with hormone, mood, and gut imbalance to heal naturally and gain 3 hours of energy daily so they feel fantastic. Oh my gosh, am I glad we're having this conversation because I could use that.
Yes, good.
Amanda is the founder of the Thyroid and Hormone Solution Program, which has helped hundreds of women beat Hashimoto's, hyperthyroidism, insulin resistance, anxiety, hypertension, brain fog, weight gain, and more. So, Amanda, I'm so happy to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm excited to be here.
We have so many things to talk about because everything in your bio is so aligned, and I know of deep value and interest to the listeners of Transforming 45. So I cannot wait to get into it. And we're going to start at the beginning. Tell us, who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
Oh, great question. I think I always say that this path of really leading and empowering women to feel fantastic in their bodies was a path that was a divine redirection. To be honest, before that, I was doing some very different work in corporate America, and then always had a passion for fitness as a sports performance trainer. But during my 4th pregnancy, so this was 14 years ago, I have 4 daughters right now. But during that last pregnancy, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And fairly common. There's over 20 million women right now that have some type of thyroid disease. But I remember, Lisa, when I had that diagnosis from the doctor, being in a state of denial, candidly, and also anger. Like, I was like, what? I was very resentful because at that time, I quote unquote thought I was doing all of the check the boxes to be healthy. I was, teaching cardio kickbox classes. I was eating salads and smoothies. I was very intentional. I'm not 100% plant-based, but very mindful of a plant-based way of eating. So I thought that's what it was, is like eat healthy food, work out, and you'll be healthy. How can this be leading to an autoimmune diagnosis? And the doctor informed me that, you need to take medication for, you'll be taking this for the rest of your life to manage your thyroid. And once you have one autoimmune diagnosis, you're at higher risk for additional diagnoses like rheumatoid arthritis and MS and different things like that. And so again, every part of my being was in a little bit of denial and wanted to solve the issue. I went into Oda and hired a naturopathic doctor and thousands of dollars of expensive lab work tests, and then met with him, was given a list of 16 supplements to start to take, an even longer list of foods that I needed to eliminate from my diet, and jumped right in and tried to take all the action and make those things happen. I did see some improvements. I think my, acne cleared up a little bit. I had a lot of facial acne. I had at the time, I was struggling with insomnia, weight gain, really, really low energy. Like, I felt depleted. I was that mom who was really sharp and snappy with my kids. I'd be like, put on your shoes. Come on, we got to get going. I was just really short fused. And so I saw a little bit of improvement, but for the amount of hard laborious work and effort and like feeling deprived because I couldn't eat what any of my family and friends and social events were, I felt very resentful of the lifestyle changes that were being asked to implement. And then it didn't improve. My thyroid antibodies continued to go right back up. So I'm like, this is not effective. What's going on? Then fast forward a few months, about 18 months after my diagnosis, my oldest daughter at that time was struck with really severe seizures. She had always been anxious as a child, but all of a sudden that anxiety heightened to where she was having 10 to 15 seizures in a day, Lisa. And I'll tell you, like, I know, I'm like, nothing brings you to your knees more as a mom than to see your child suffering and thinking like, any day this could be a life or death scenario for her. So we ran all of the amazing tests with the neurologists and were told that nothing was wrong with her body. She didn't have a tumor or a clear definitive cause of the seizures, that sometimes these things are genetic, just like my autoimmune. Sometimes this is genetic. And again, that just did not resonate with me. I was like, every fiber in my being wanted more pieces of the puzzle to be like, well, what caused it? Like, what was a sequence of pattern of events or dynamics that created this in her body and in my body? That's when I decided to go back to school to study functional medicine science, which is really the science of understanding how all of the different systems in the body, our digestive system, our nervous system, our, immune system, everything works together to find the blockage, impairment, or depletion for that unique individual and identify a course of action and a series of rebuilding health that you can actually do something about to strengthen the body's working order, if you will. That's a long way of saying really understanding how to take control and be empowered in your own individual health. That journey allowed us to completely radically transform. I mean, I weaned off of my thyroid medication and have been ever since. My daughter was able to she went from being on 4 benzodiazepine medications, taking 12 pills a day as an 8-year-old, just to make it through 24 hours without a seizure, to being completely medication free, symptom free ever since. Like, she's more clear, empowered, and in tune with her body's needs. She's now a sophomore on a full ride scholarship in college, like doing great. So that journey was the biggest challenge in our life that led to the biggest blessing of health empowerment. And that's exactly what drives this mission, to share with more women how they can learn to become empowered in their own unique bodies so they feel fantastic.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. It's so important to hear the journey, right? Because one of the things that I never take for granted in this work that I do now is how much of ourselves we are pouring out into the world, right? Often, I mean, humans in general, but women in particular, especially when we're doing this kind of advocacy work, when we're doing this kind of care work, it's because of something we experienced in our own lives. And we want to clear the pathway for the people that are coming behind us. And so knowing why that is so important to you, I think is really key in helping your message to resonate, and also highlighting and saying thank you for doing that work. It's not easy being the one who clears the pathway, right? There can be some challenge in that. And so thank you for taking that on and for being so vulnerable and willing to share your personal stories. So I really appreciate that. So thank you. And this is one of my favorite conversations to have, because we get so tied up between the war between traditional medicine and looking at our bodies as whole systems. And it's so important to say it doesn't have to be a war.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It
Yeah.
actually gets to be integrated.
Percent. Yes. And so that's why in the work I do around perimenopause, I always like to position symptoms, and it sounds like you are doing the same thing, as messages from your body. Yes. So instead of it being like, this is the thing that I now have to live with and manage for the rest of my life, it's like, this is a message that my body is sending me, and let's figure out what the root cause was. Right. So, what was the root cause for you that when you made that shift, it allowed you to be able to move away from medication and be able to care for your whole system?
Yes, I would say the underlying root cause is a multifactorial, but really at its core was living from a place of lack. And I'll explain it further in the sense that it ran my nervous system to always be living from the space of not enough time, not enough love and attention when I was seeking that love and validation from external family members, my husband for a while, right? I held on to resentments that were like literally stored in my body from some inner family dynamics growing up with my immediate family, and then projected some of that onto my marriage relationship in the earlier years. So it's interesting because when I first stepped into working with a naturopathic doctor after the diagnosis, absolutely nutrition is an important part, right? We talk about having the core components that our cells need to thrive and helping to be able to support the microbiome. That is critical. Yet at that time, I had no awareness of and attention towards improving my emotional state of being and my thoughts and perceptions, infusing the neuroscience into the work. And that was a game changer. So it's really because it's a combination of the physiological aspects and the behavior patterns, the ingrained thoughts and beliefs and perceptions about the way that we just assume that the world is, that gets to be shifted to really, because at the end of the day, we have this HPATG axis of interconnection, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, which affects the adrenals and the thyroid, and then our sex hormones, right? So they're all connected, and they start at the top with the hypothalamus, which is your brain, which is your thoughts, your perceptions, and your beliefs about the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making that so clear because it is very easy to get really caught up in the body and what's happening here without making the connection to our emotional body
Yes.
and the impact that it has, and that we can't separate those two things. And it's one of the things I worry about in the menopause space and the menopause conversation, because at this point in time, and I've said this before, and there's no part of me that is saying that we don't need medical doctors, that we don't need research, that we don't like, we need that. And we also need to pay attention to everything else that is happening in our world. And midlife, I don't know if this has been your experience. From your story, it sounds like it is, but it often is a time where we are forced to face all of the things that we have been trying, that we've been running from. And so not only are our bodies are absolutely going through a physical transformation, and that physical transformation is impacted by the decades of life that we have lived before that. And so we cannot focus solely on the physical body without also focusing on the things we've been trying to outrun, the things we've been trying to ignore, and all of the things that are changing in our lives right at this moment. So how do you support women to make that connection when you're working with them around reclaiming their
A
health?
couple of ways. In the process, I use a 5-step process and methodology to help to rebuild health and to bring the body into balance. So the first step is a root cause. Identify the root cause for your unique situation, your unique body. Replenish nutrients, restore digestive capacity. That's a lot to do with gut health. And then reset our thinking. So going even deeper and then removing toxins. Notice the toxins, the removing of the toxins is actually at the end, step 5. A lot of people want to start with detoxify, which there is a place to make sure we're not overburdening the system. However, I have found that when we look to detoxify, quote unquote, and remove things, coming from a place of strength is actually to our advantage than if we're already coming from a place of depletion and we're trying to add some detoxifying components that can be sometimes like overburdensome for the body. But to your point, how do we do that? The very beginning, it's about educating and linking up that root cause. So in working with women, we do a comprehensive health history review and looking at the life circumstances as well as the food choices and all these different pieces of the puzzle. Symptom questionnaire, so a physical symptom like reflection of what symptoms are popping up, how frequently, and what do these kind of correlate to. And then I have an unconscious health blocks assessment. So just simply by identifying what are the thoughts and the beliefs and the perceptions about the way that the world works, checking where you have unconscious belief patterns or thoughts or emotional attachment to things that are likely creating that sympathetic dominant response in the body. So it's kind of this combination. So from the very beginning, we're starting to put the puzzle pieces together from the physical body and the physical symptoms, cues, and clues, and also the mental, emotional thoughts and beliefs and perspectives, and like how they match up to really trigger and inform your whole experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So personally, right now, I'm at the beginning of I've been coaching for a couple of years, but now I'm at the beginning of like, okay, like perimenopause is for real now. Like I can't just manage it on my own. It's time. So I am in the process of like osteopath, therapist, naturopathic doctor, doing all of the things, looking at menopause hormone therapy and how that is going to impact my system. And one of the questions I get a lot, so reflecting back, also reflecting on my own experience of like, how long do I really want to leave this? Like, how long do I want to stay in the space of like knowing I am not functioning at my best capacity? And when I'm facilitating a session, inevitably I get the question of like, well, how do I know when it's time? How bad does it have to be? And so I know what my answer to that is. And what is your response to women when they question?
Of how bad it has to be before I do something different? Oh, that's a good question. I've never been asked that question, but I think
Okay.
that's a really good question. I think it depends on how quickly you want to move in the direction of building health. Because
Mhm.
the longer you allow it to progress towards diminishment, the longer it will take to reach peak performance. Right. So I tend to be a person who's a quick start by nature, just in general across the board. So it's like, if I notice something, I'm going to start to like get curious about that and respond fairly quickly. Now, that's not everyone, and it doesn't have to be everyone, but just to have some grace and space for yourself, that if you are somebody who really wants to kind of sit and marinate with something for a while and kind of discern who it feels uncomfortable to shift in a new direction, okay, great, that's totally understandable, but then give yourself the compassion to build in a longer trajectory to expect that transformation to unfold.
That's it. So my response is always like, you don't have to suffer. Bad doesn't have to be the word that we're using. Like,
Yeah.
how much do I have to suffer? How bad does it have to be? Don't suffer. You have been, we've been through enough suffering that at this point, when you feel like it's time for me to feel better, that is the time. And then the follow up, I loved that response around how long do you want it to take? Because it is so true that the longer we wait and the more challenging our symptoms and those messages from our body become, we are in more of a place of depletion, right? And so then we are filling up that depletion before we can even get to the full scale healing. And
Right.
so, yeah, so I think that is a really great follow up to the like, you do not have to suffer. And yeah, one of the other things I'm wondering about is often I'll have women say, yeah, I don't know, I don't really have any symptoms of perimenopause. I don't think that's my issue. They are in postmenopause. They're like, oh yeah, it was fine. I didn't really notice anything, but I do now have fatty liver and I've gained weight and I've like, so all of these things, which we know are actually or experiences that we have in postmenopause.
Mhm.
So, can you talk a little bit about how the fluctuation and the depletion of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone impact more than just our reproductive system? So, let's talk about the gut in particular. So,
Yeah.
what is happening in the gut with that depletion of hormones, and what can we do to heal it and to start feeling better?
Yeah. So one of the first signs, or one of the first most common dynamics that we can see with women as they start to phase into perimenopause, which I'm sure your listeners have learned from you, Lisa, is that can be a period of 5 to 10 years. So preceding formal menopause, which is 12 months without a cycle. So that could start in our early 30s for some women, or even mid 30s. So it can be a substantial period of time before we tend to think of traditional menopause or even perimenopause. And typically, progesterone is a hormone that starts to drop off earlier than estrogen. So it becomes at a higher likelihood that we can have a relative estrogen dominant dynamic in the body as compared to progesterone for many women. What happens in that case? Well, specifically in the gut, there is an enzyme called beta glucuronidase, which is important to be there. It helps to break down carbohydrates and things like that. However, we can have excess amounts of this enzyme, beta glucuronidase, that can actually decouple estrogen compounds that have been packaged up and are meant to be excreted from the body. So we can kind of get a double whammy. What does that mean? It means that when your body would normally, through the liver, start to process and kind of like, I think of it like packaging up the garbage bag to like take and excrete some of the estrogen out of the body, it can actually be, it's almost like that garbage bag on the way from the kitchen out to the curb got ripped open and spilled again all over the floor, all over the kitchen. It makes a mess, right? So when we have higher levels of this enzyme beta glucuronidase, it's more likely that that garbage bag on the way of being transported out to the curb is opened up and spilled all over the kitchen again. That can again enhance the level of circulating estrogen, especially when our progesterone levels are diminishing. If our estrogen isn't properly being excreted, now it can really skew the tables, right? And excess estrogen can lead to symptoms like racing mind, where you feel like you can't get your brain to settle down, insomnia for some women, things like that. Another dynamic that is often followed when we have this imbalance in estrogen and progesterone, estrogen by itself can start to block thyroid hormone action. So it can slow down our metabolism, slow down thyroid function at a cellular level. And when we have, the saying, sluggish thyroid, sluggish everything, which means your digestion slows down. It can lead to constipation. It can lead to bloating. It means maybe your mental clarity slows down. It can lead to brain fog. It can lead to just kind of a malaise feeling, different things like that. Really kind of a compounding effect from these changing hormones in the gut at the gut level, if that makes sense. Those
No.
are a couple of the examples.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. And it's so important for us to understand all of the functions that those shifting hormones have in our bodies, because there's still, when you live in the menopause world, it's easy to think like, oh, everybody knows this information now.
Yes.
And that's not the case. The minute you take a step outside of the menopause world, you realize, oh, there's still so much knowledge advocacy that we need to do. And so thank you for sharing that information. That's really key. And so what is the first thing you suggest, or what's the first thing you do with clients to help them start to regulate that in their bodies?
Yes. Well, one simple like nutritional support mechanism with regards to estrogen detoxification and helping that to run smoothly is the addition and consuming cruciferous vegetables regularly. So cruciferous vegetables, things like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and Brussels sprouts, contain a sulforaphane nutrient. And you can also find it in supplement form, but I always encourage real whole foods when possible, that can help to maintain that estrogen excretion, to keep that beta glucuronidase enzyme in balance and in check. So, thinking about one of my favorite things to do, Lisa, is just to, every week I make a big batch of roasted veggies with like cauliflower and onions and broccoli and Brussels sprouts and things like that, and just roast it up with a little bit of olive oil and seasoning and have that as an easy to go. You can add it with a side of a couple scrambled eggs for breakfast. You can toss it over a salad with other ingredients and some smoked salmon for lunch. You can have it as a side with dinner. It's easy if you make a big batch to then be able to repurpose and have these cruciferous veggies consistently in your diet and your meal plan. Another thing that's really helpful is to think about how you are consuming food. So when we talk about the gut and our microbiome health, a lot has to do with the state of being that we are in emotionally, mentally, while consuming food. So again, these things sound simple, but they really can have profound effects when they're done repeatedly. So when you're thinking about where do I eat lunch or how do I eat lunch most days of the week, especially Monday through Friday, if your routine or your work life is relatively familiar day in and day out, are you eating? Are you actually taking a break and like maybe removing yourself from your desk or your office and sitting down somewhere to be present, to smell the food, to notice the flavors and the colors on your plate, to maybe even say, the sacred practice of saying a prayer before meals is actually, yes, spiritually very enriching, but it's physically very enriching too, because it allows us to be present with our food and to slow down to actually experience the process of consuming. This changes the capacity for your body to have adequate hydrochloric acid in the stomach to be able to denature proteins and break down those veggies and foods that we're eating. It allows us to chew and be more conscious of how often we're chewing and processing our food in our mouth before we swallow and gobble it down. I mean, most people go like chomp, chomp, chomp swallow big chunks of stuff when they're unconsciously consuming, as opposed to sitting down, having a quiet space, really noticing the textures and the flavors and the sensations in your mouth and almost liquefying the food before it goes down your esophagus. Huge world of difference for what happens in the microbiome and with your digestion simply by changing how you're consuming the foods.
So important on many levels.
Mhm.
Right. And when I think about, so myself as a former educator, I know that there are a lot of educators who listen to this podcast, women who are in caregiving professions. Lunch looks like walking and putting food in your mouth at the same time. Like the only purpose is getting yourself enough energy so that you can get through the rest of the day. And so thank you for explaining so clearly the impact that that has on our physical body and on our digestion. And what I love that you brought into that conversation also was how that doesn't give us any time to value our humanity.
Yes. Exactly. It goes back to one of those earlier unconscious beliefs, the health blocks, is lack of time. We often have this narrative, this tape playing that I don't have time, I don't have time, I don't have time. Well, if we speak to ourselves and talk to ourselves and think that way all the time, guess what? You're not going to have time. However, you can switch that tape and say, I do have time for all the things that are most important for my vitality. I do have time for all the things that are going to increase my energy.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is something that can feel like a challenge to implement.
Absolutely. Mhm.
And once you make the decision to do it and you realize that you do have that time and it is okay, because I think more than anything, it comes from that like internal belief of I just have to be productive all day long. I need to show that I am busy. I need to show that I'm being productive. That is how my worth is valued in whatever space that I am in. And the act of I am going to remove myself from this chaos that happens during the day and value myself enough to give myself 20 minutes, right? Even start with 15. Right? Just start with 15 minutes of giving yourself a quiet space to sit and eat and let your nervous system settle.
Yes.
Yeah. So, because when we are in action, continuing to be in action and trying to feed ourselves, and like, I don't have time, there's no space for me, that just continues to heighten our nervous system. And so, can you speak a little bit more to that connection between, well, one, can you do I've done episodes around microbiome, but I like to make sure that people all are on the same sort of educational level around that. So talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what the microbiome is
Okay.
and that interplay between the nervous system.
Yes. Okay. So the microbiome is the collection of literally trillions of microscopic species that live between our esophagus, our mouth, and our whole entire digestive tract that goes down the esophagus, into the stomach, into the small intestine, the colon intestine, and out the anus. Literally, that whole entire canal is filled with different species of bacteria and viruses and microbes and all these different things that are constantly, in fact, their DNA outnumbers ours by 300 times. So it's kind of ironic to think that who's the host here, right? And who's really the one in charge. But it's almost mind boggling to consume the complexity and the diversity and the impact of these tiny little bugs in our body.
And there's also microbiome, I just like on our outside too, right? Like our skin, right? All of it's
Yeah, it's everywhere. Yes. And the species, the diversity, the type of species that we'll have present are going to depend on a variety of factors, depend on our food supply, right? Because different types of species rely on a different type of food. So if we have ones that, like yeast and candida, have a higher glucose sugar content of their food supply. If we have high fiber foods that can provide food for different species that have beneficial effects. So it's really based on the foods that we're consuming. That's like information to our body. It also is, like you mentioned previously, tied very intimately to the nervous system. because it's generating and synthesizing certain neurotransmitters. It's responsible for generating up to 90% of our serotonin, which is considered the happy hormone, right?
Uh-huh.
That we need to have. That is generated and synthesized primarily in the gut area. So again, our ability to be at equilibrium, maintain that mood and that stability, and even pain perception starts with what's happening in the gut, not necessarily what's happening in the brain. But
Uh-huh.
these different species, they create hormones, they create vitamins, even, they create a whole bunch of different components, enzymes, a whole host of different activities that they're responsible for. And when we are living in that sympathetic dominant fight or flight response, that's communicating to those species. That's saying you do not live in a safe world. You better be prepared to fight or flee and prioritize resources and energies to go to the large muscle groups, to make our heart pump faster, to make our legs be able to run, to fight or flee, even if we're sitting at our desk and thinking about a frustrating situation that happened with a coworker. My body may be perceiving that I'm at a physical threat. And that creates a different allocation of resources, not wrong or right, just a different allocation of resources and a higher burn rate of certain systems in the body that can over time create inflammation because they can be just triggered so persistently while other ones are diminished. So when we're, for example, in fight or flight response, that deprioritizes on purpose, like nothing has gone wrong, but on purpose, your body is deprioritizing immunity, immune system strength. It's deprioritizing digestion and absorption. It's deprioritizing cellular repair. So those things are kind of like put on the back burner and not looked at as consistently when we're in the fight or flight response. So we can see how all of these cues and clues with what's happening in the gut, with what's happening in the nervous system, are constantly telling the body how to respond based on the perceived environment that we're creating for ourselves.
Yeah. I think that is really important information always, but sort of in this time that we're living in, also, I think it's really important. So, one, we've got the, chemical shifts that are happening in our bodies, which are impacting. And one of the things have heard a lot over the last, let's say this winter season, and also there's like the seasonality of that exists in it. And I've been sick for a really long time. I just can't seem to get better. I've had this flu, I've had this cold for weeks. Like it is just hanging on. I am more tired than I have ever been. And when we think about the speed at which our news cycle happens and the sort of chaotic space that we are in, which, regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, it's lighting up our nervous systems.
Yes.
So, what can we do to be aware of of knowing when our nervous system is heightened, the impact it's having, and what's one small thing we can do to help bring it down so that our bodies get a chance to actually start the healing process.
I love this. And I'm just going to comment on, you mentioned like the news cycle. Well, the most recent data in 2025 shows us that adults have an average attention span of 2.9 seconds, Lisa. So that has implications for the nervous system. Again, that really like turns up the volume on information that's coming in through our five senses, predominantly our eyesight, our vision, our hearing, and even to another extent, our taste and our touch. But the amount of sensory stimulation coming in, especially in a world of social media where things are constantly shifting and flipping and changing, 2.9 seconds on average, that requires a greater degree of responsibility in order to continue to thrive. And it really, I love that we're having this conversation because it really invites women to be willing, and I use that word intentionally, to be willing to do something different than the norm. Because the norm is 2.9 seconds attention span. The norm is an average of over 15 hours per week on devices. The norm is 85% of women have two or more chronic disease diagnoses by the time they reach age 65. That's preceded by the choices and behaviors and thoughts in our 40s and our 50s. The norm is, according to the Mayo Proceedings Clinic report, 3% of US adults are healthy, happy, and on track to stay that way. So if we don't want to be in that 95% or 97%,
Say, wait a minute. Can you say that again? Because I think that is huge.
and notice it's healthy, happy. So, like emotional wellness and physical wellness is measured. 3% of adults in America are healthy, happy, and on track to stay that way. Three. So, if we want to be normal, 97%, we're going to head in that direction of chronic disease, unhappiness, and depletion, right? So, it's really the invitation to be willing to be different, to be willing to challenge ourselves and challenge the norm of what we see, or at least what we're perceiving as everyone else is doing around us, which is uncomfortable. We're a species that's meant to connect and to have community and support together. So we can acknowledge that that is going to take some activation energy to go outside the norm, right? And that's the value of working with people like yourself or myself, of really coming into community support and having guidance, having mentorship, having inspiration, having a game plan makes it 10 times easier than try and go at it alone. But that's beside the point. The point is really recognizing the willingness to look at things from a different way. And also that 2.9-second attention span is really telling of where am I creating quiet space in my life. That's the first, if I were to say intervention number one, it would just look for where do I have peace, quiet space in my life? Because within that space is where revelation can come to the surface, whether it be revelation about, hey, sometimes when I have space, my body starts to talk to me a little bit and I notice the symptoms more so than I was kind of tuning them out and really like disassociated from them. So it can feel uncomfortable, but that's actually a sign of progress, not a sign of regress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to position it that way, is that this is a sign of progress. It's uncomfortable, right? Humans are not wired for discomfort. And so we try to avoid it at all costs. And it is the space in which we actually grow and change, right? And so I will, like, in full transparency, I've been super activated this weekend and this morning. I was really, really struggling. And I am an audiophile. Like, I always have a podcast or music or something happening, but I have been aware, I've been noticing the attention span that you're talking about. I have really started to notice that in myself. And so I have been forcing myself to disconnect from all of the constant audio input, and to have some quiet in my morning. And it can be as simple as just letting yourself notice when you are doing something for distraction. So this morning, when I went to let my dogs out, I was listening to a podcast, had my phone in my pocket, listening to the podcast. I opened the door, and I live in Canada, which has been in Ontario, which is, I think, very similarly to you, having quite a winter.
Yes.
Yes. And so I opened the door this morning and the sun was shining, and I could actually feel the warmth from the sun, and I could hear the birds chirping. And it was a cue to me to turn off the podcast,
Yes.
to just be still in that moment, to let myself feel the sun on my face and just listen to the birds. And that one, just the moment of awareness of what I was doing
Mhm.
and what I needed to sort of shift, allowed my very overwrought nervous system to come down, even just in that moment. So, for those who are listening, if making a massive change feels like it's too much, then just giving yourself time to be in awareness and just in that moment take an action, because it is those moments that will, and you start realizing the impact that it has, that then we start to string those moments together. And that's what creates a shift in a habit. It doesn't have to be a full scale, I'm going to quit all social media, I'm not going to listen to anything, I'm just going to, like, let's be real and realistic about starting with small moments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's where it all builds from. And one of my favorite strategies to incorporate is what I call pleasure bundling. So when you do something that you would normally do automatically, like brush your teeth or use the restroom, something that you're going to do automatically, to bundle that action with one of these pleasure moments, something that is just going to allow you to get back into presence. Even if sometimes it's putting your hands on your body and noticing your abdomen when you breathe. It can be super simple and quick. It doesn't necessarily need to be these really long drawn out process. It's just really the repetition and the willingness to create space for it.
Absolutely. All right. So, through the conversation, we've talked about getting roasted vegetables. That's a really great strategy, having those ready to go, giving ourselves a little bit of time to be present, thinking about how our nervous system is connected to our microbiome. And just for those who are listening, just pick one of those areas to start to focus, right? Just one of those things, and you will start to notice a change in your quality of health. So, where can people find you? And is there any last thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to. In fact, I'm happy to share as a gift, Lisa, to your audience, my free hormone health assessment, which is one way that they can tap into the top 6 metabolic hormones based on the symptoms that are showing up for their body. If they get quiet and just take a few minutes to reflect, it will point you. It's kind of like a roadmap. It'll point in the direction of, is this something that you may want to explore thyroid health a little bit deeper? Does this look like it could be in balance of cortisol or insulin? But it's just a kind of a roadmap, a tool to use your body's cues and clues to point in the right direction. So I'm happy to share that. And also, you can go to hinmanholistic.com and pick up a copy of my book, The Thyroid and Hormone Solution. Also, the hormone assessment is available there as well. But really allowing women to have resources, have tools that will streamline and simplify their own time, energy, and attention to understanding their bodies.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. I so appreciate it. All of the links to Amanda's resources will be in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. Amanda, thank you so much for being with us today. I appreciate you.
My pleasure, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone. Thanks for joining me on this week's episode of Transforming 45. I hope you feel inspired, empowered, and ready to embrace every facet of your midlife journey. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. These actions make a world of difference in growing our podcast community. Your support helps us reach much more amazing listeners just like you. And don't forget, please share an episode you love with a friend or with your community. Sharing our stories is what helps our community grow. Keep shining your midlife magic, and I'll catch you next week.
Electricast.